Hello and welcome back to Race for the White House, our daily show on US politics. On today's episode, we're going to cover the latest from the battleground that immigration has become in the US elections. Republican Vice President JD Vance is finding it hard to stay out of headlines. Vance has quickly acquired a reputation for taking hardline positions on some of the most dominant issues of the US election campaign. On Sunday, he did it again. In an interview with ABC News, Vance advocated mass deportations of 1 million immigrants who have arrived in America illegally with the eventual goal of deporting up to 20 million immigrants. Vance said that the problem of illegal immigration can be solved by deporting large numbers of violent criminals and making it harder for firms to hire workers who have migrated to America illegally. Vance's comments on immigration simply reflect how important immigration has become to the present election. The US immigration system is widely considered to be broken, with decades of legislative gridlock resulting in a complex and inefficient system. Comprehensive reform has long been debated but seldom achieved, leaving millions of undocumented immigrants in legal limbo. The Democratic Party has advocated for a comprehensive immigration reform bill. This involves providing pathways to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, protecting young immigrants brought to the United States as children, also known as dreamers, and implementing more humane border policies. Under the Biden administration, efforts have been made to reverse some of the restrictive policies from the Trump era, such as ending family separations and the Remain in Mexico policy, as well as proposing legislation to address immigration reform. In contrast, the MAGA Republicans led by former President Donald Trump have championed more restrictive immigration policies. These include building a border wall, implementing travel bans in certain countries, and significantly reducing refugee admissions. The Trump administration also enforced a zero-tolerance policy, which led to the controversial separation of families at the border. Immigration remains a pivotal issue in the 2024 campaign. In fact, since Biden became president in 2021, around 6.3 million individuals are being detained for crossing into the country illegally. Just in December 2023, 250,000 people were detained for trying to cross into the United States. There are a number of reasons for these massive numbers, but mostly it's caused by massive numbers of asylum seekers who are fleeing economic instability and violence in Central American countries like Venezuela, Nicaragua, Haiti, Cuba, Ecuador, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador.
But 10 to 15 million people, this is
Well, John, I think that's the wrong attitude to take of it. Okay,
so you go knock on doors and ask people for their papers.
Again, but
what do you do?
let me finish. I think this is the wrong attitude towards it, right? There's 20 million people here illegally. You start with what's achievable. You do that. And then you go on to what's achievable from there. I think that if you deport a lot of violent criminals, and frankly, if you make it harder to hire illegal labor, which undercuts the wages of American workers, I think you go a lot of the way to solving the illegal immigration problem. But look, President Trump is absolutely right. You cannot have a border unless you're willing to deport some people. I think it's interesting that people focus on, well, how do you deport 18 million people? Let's start with 1 million. That's where Kamala Harris has failed, and then we can go from there.
Both parties are trying to use this issue to mobilize their bases. For Republicans, especially the MAGA wing led by Donald Trump, immigration is framed as a matter of national security and economic stability. JD Vance's comments about starting mass deportations with 1 million immigrants are indicative of this hardline stance, which aim to resonate with voters concerned about illegal immigration and its impacts. Democrats, on the other hand, emphasize the need for humane and comprehensive immigration reform. They advocate for policies that protect the rights of immigrants, integrate them into society, and address the root causes of migration. Kamala Harris, as the Democratic candidate, will likely highlight these differences, contrasting the Democrats' vision of an inclusive and fair immigration system with the restrictive measures proposed by the Republicans. As the election draws closer, immigration will undoubtedly remain at the forefront of political discourse, shaping the strategies and platforms of both parties. For more on this, we are now joined by India Today Global correspondent Rohit Sharma from Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us, Rohit. Could you begin by giving us some more context on Vance's comments, these immigration proposals? What exactly did Vance say about how they plan to implement such a large-scale deportation program?
The Trump campaign has faced significant setbacks in recent weeks, with VP candidate JD Vance at the center of a 3-week debacle that has seen Trump's lead erode in the national polls, particularly in the swing states. To address the criticism surrounding Vance's previous comments, Vance sat down with Jonathan Karl of ABC News, but his remarks about rounding up and deporting immigrants have sparked a new controversy. He also took an aim at the Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris, pinning blame on her for the crisis at the southern border. However, these statements have further polarized voters, intensifying debates on immigration policy and the effectiveness of the current administration. As the election approaches, Trump campaign is seeking to regain momentum amidst growing scrutiny and public dissent.
So Vance mentioned starting with a deportation of 1 million people. How has this plan been received by the immigration experts as well as by the public?
Look, in the interview, Vance outlined a phased approach to deportation, starting with the violent criminals and then targeting the hiring of undocumented workers. He emphasized that beginning with smaller and more manageable goals could make overall plan more achievable. He stated that Trump's administration could possibly start the process of deporting millions of undocumented immigrants in waves and starting with 1 million at a time. Now, Vance was clear in his criticism of the current administration policies, particularly ending of the Remain in Mexico policy, which he believes has led to the unchecked entry of illegal immigrants in the U.S.
Right. And what did Vance have to say about the criticism aimed at Kamala Harris and the Biden administration's immigration policies by the Republican Party?
Well, experts have largely criticized the plan. They call it a logistical and humanitarian nightmare. They argue that such large-scale deportations would be incredibly challenging to execute and could lead to significant human rights concerns. Now, look, they warn that deporting millions of immigrants will have a massive impact on the U.S. economy, something that the current administration has also talked about. So the public opinion is divided, with some supporting tougher immigration enforcement and others advocating for a more humane immigration reform that allows for these undocumented immigrants to stay in the U.S. And become citizens. And this is something the Republicans oppose. And that is why immigration is such a central issue in this campaign. And I think Vance was basically trying to rile up his base by making those comments. Like Trump, Vance has been quite vocal in his criticism, targeting Vice President Kamala Harris. He has argued again that the current administration has failed to address the root causes of illegal immigration and their policies. Now, just for our viewers to understand, back in 2022, President Biden called on Kamala Harris to go and address the root causes of illegal immigration. The media termed her as immigration czar and whatnot, and I think they're trying to target that role that Kamala Harris possibly didn't or was not able to play completely in addressing those crises. They point to, when I say they, I mean Vance and Trump, they point to Remain in Mexico that has contributed to this crisis. But the Kamala Harris campaign and now is sort of trying to distance itself a little bit from some of those decisions back in 2022. And in their defense, they're pointing to the executive action that President Biden took in June of this year that has led to reduction in the border crossings. But as you'd expect, Vance believes that a more aggressive approach like closing the U.S. border completely and deporting immigrants is necessary to control the situation.
Right. Thank you, Rohit. And as this race for the White House heats up, we'll continue to follow these developments closely. Moving on. Registering to vote in the US may seem easy. Adults fill out a form and submit it online, in person, or through the mail. But getting onto a state's voter roll and staying there can be complicated. It's also a key reason why more Americans don't participate in elections. My colleague Nia Shukla simplifies it for you.
So you're diving into the world of US elections and you want to get the lowdown on voting and voter registration. We've got you covered. First things first, let's talk about getting registered. You can kick things off at vote.gov. This will be your one-stop shop to start the voter registration process. You just pick your state or territory and follow the instructions. Here's how you can register. 1. Online. Fast and convenient, if your state allows it. 2. By mail. Download and fill out the National Mail Voter Registration form, then mail it in. And 3. In person. Swing by your local election office to register. Now, for those overseas, if you're a US citizen living abroad, in the military, or a family member of someone stationed overseas, the Federal Voting Assistance Program is your best friend. They help you register and request absentee ballots so you can vote no matter where you are. Now, what about when you're updating your registration? Suppose you had a name change or moved recently. It's important to update your registration, right? Go to vote.gov, select your state and follow the instructions to update your details online, by mail or in person again. If you've moved to a new state, you'll need to register there. Let's also now talk about party affiliation. You don't really have to stick with one party. Your party affiliation is mainly for primaries and does not affect your general election vote. You can always check with your state election office on how to change your party preference if that's your thing. Since we're on the subject of elections now, I think it's important to talk about and address election crimes as well. There are some major no-nos that can really mess with the fairness of the process. In fact, let's quickly take a look at what falls under these election crimes and why they matter. First up, let's talk campaign finance. This is all about how money flows into elections. For starters, it's illegal if someone gives more than $4,600 to a federal candidate. Imagine someone tries to sidestep this by asking a friend to donate the money for them with the promise to pay the friend back. That's actually considered illegal because it's a sneaky way to get around donation limits. Oh, and corporate money? You cannot use that to directly support federal candidates either. Plus, if you're not a US citizen or a green card holder, you're off limits for making any contributions to federal candidates. Now, let's touch upon voter and ballot fraud. If someone intentionally gives false information when they register to vote, that's considered fraud. It's like pretending to be someone you're not. Also, nobody should be offering cash or gifts in exchange for your vote or for registering. Voting is a serious matter and it's got to be clean. Also, some people try to vote more than once. That's a big problem because each person only gets one vote. And if an election official is messing with the system, like letting unqualified voters cast their ballots, that's a serious abuse of power. Lastly, we need to touch on civil rights violations as well. This includes stuff like threatening someone to make them vote a certain way, totally illegal. Preventing people from getting to the polls or setting up barriers to voting is another no-go. Everybody deserves a fair chance to vote, no matter their background. So, what's the takeaway? These crimes undermine the trust and integrity of our elections. If you see or suspect voter fraud, intimidation, or any election crimes, you've got to report it. You can always contact your state election office, the local FBI office, or the Department of Justice. Is voting mandatory? Well, no. Voting in the US is not mandatory. It's a right guaranteed by the Constitution, but it's not something that you're required to do by law. You have the freedom to decide whether or not you want to vote. In presidential elections, you can vote for any candidate regardless of your party affiliation. The election is usually on the first Tuesday in November, but do check for options like absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, and early voting if you need them. And there you have a wrap on the US elections voter registration process.
Now, time for some quick updates from the political landscape in America that you might have missed. Former President Donald Trump has advanced a new line of attack against Vice President Kamala Harris. Trump alleged that Harris was faking the size of her rallies and posted a photo to support his claim. In fact, many right-wingers pointed out that the photo was digitally manipulated because there was no reflection on the plane's turbine. However, videos from the event prove that several people were actually present at the event. In videos released on social media, people were seen standing shoulder to shoulder, packing the area. A rally video posted on X zoomed in on Harris and her vice presidential candidate Tim Walz as they descended the stairs of Air Force 2. Kamala Harris's homecoming in California's San Francisco Bay has turned out to be extremely lucrative. The Democratic presidential nominee's campaign says that Harris has hauled in over $20 million on Sunday at a fundraiser held in San Francisco. Harris was introduced at the fundraiser by former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who has represented San Francisco in Congress for nearly 4 decades. Harris taking over as a nominee triggered a surge in donations, with wealthy donors who had been holding back opening their checkbooks. About 700 people stood in line for Harris's first Bay Area campaign stop since rising to the top of the Democratic ticket. Although cameras were not allowed inside the event. Harris's Bay Area roots run deep. She was born there and later served as San Francisco's district attorney. Vice President Kamala Harris is leading over Trump in 6 national aggregate polls for the extremely tight 2024 presidential election. Harris joined the campaign trail after President Joe Biden's unprecedented exit from the race on July 21st and has since garnered widespread support from the Democratic Party. As of Saturday, 6 national aggregate polls placed her in the lead, with margins ranging from 0.5 to 2.5 points. The Democratic nominee has made waves with the strategic choice of picking Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as a vice presidential pick. Moving on, in a recent interview, US President Joe Biden has admitted that members of the Democratic Party felt that if he ran for the White House, it would hurt the party's chance of winning. He also indicated that Nancy Pelosi could have been one of the people who may have pushed Democrats to ask Biden to step out of the White House race. Biden has endorsed US Vice President Kamala Harris soon after he dropped out of the White House race. He said that the key priority of the election was to maintain democracy, while saying that his predecessor, Donald Trump, is a threat to the country. Democrats' hopes of winning have surged since Biden's withdrawal, as Harris enjoys a major increase in support that has left Trump and the Republicans struggling. That's all from me on this edition of Race for the White House. We hope to see you tomorrow with some more updates. Thank you for watching India Today Global.